with this, our third session, uh, this one titled Impacts of Colorado Concurrent Enrollment on Postsecondary and Workforce Success. We have an amazing panel with Michael Vente, Carl Einhaus, Pamela Buckley, and Robert Reichard. Who's first?
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Vante from CDHE. I think I'll probably go first and lead our presentation, and I'll throw it over to my colleagues as appropriate and needed. So, Marty, thanks so much. Really appreciate your help and guidance. I will say I'm going to start because I always have trouble looking at the chat before I share my screen. So I'm going to drop a few things into the chat in terms of some additional links, additional resources that are related to some of the things that we're going to talk about. So you can peruse them at your leisure, save them for later, whatever works best for you. But just want to make sure that you have those in hand as we go through all of this. So bear with me just a second. I'm going to share.
And if folks have questions along the way, please put them in the chat box. Do you folks want to take questions as they come up, or do you want to hold them to the end?
I would say let's try to hold them to the end. By all means, please put things, whatever, in the chat box, and maybe again, I might have some trouble as sharing my screen, kind of seeing the chat go back and forth. So Pam, Carl, Robert, I might turn to you to help with some of the chat questions if they come up. But then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A and being able to just have kind of an open conversation. So very much welcome that at the end, if that sounds good.
Great, perfect.
Wonderful. Well, again, thanks so much to you all for being here. It looks like we have a great group today. So really excited to be able to share some of the work that we've been doing at CDHE along with some of our partners to be able to tell the story of concurrent enrollment in Colorado and the impact that it has on so many things. So today I'm joined by some of my colleagues, Carl Einhaus at CDHE, Dr. Pam Buckley at CU Boulder, Dr. Robert Reichart at APA Consulting. All of them have played a crucial role in a lot of our work and so many others in terms of being able to do some of this work that we've done over the past several years and being able to carry it on into the future. So a little bit of an agenda of what we wanted to go over today. One, I think it's always helpful, although you all are a very knowledgeable group, but just being able to talk about the different buckets of dual enrollment that we have in Colorado. I think it's always helpful just to make sure that we have a little bit of that conversation before we get started. Also, being able to give a summary of the landscape of concurrent enrollment in Colorado. So being able to specifically look at the state's program and look at some of the things that were in our recent concurrent enrollment report, and then being able to talk about the impact, costs, and returns of concurrent enrollment when it comes to post-secondary success, workforce outcomes, a whole host of things. So really excited to share all of this with you. So I might turn it over to my colleague Carl first. And Carl, if you would be able to help us out with this one, just to be able to talk about the different buckets of concurrent, or I should say, the different buckets of dual enrollment that we have in Colorado, what goes into that, and just being able to kind of set that table. So Carl, are you able to maybe do that for us?
I think I can, Michael. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Carl Einhaus, and I'm the Senior Director for Student Success and P-12 Alignment for the Department of Higher Education. One of my responsibilities is to be the program lead for concurrent enrollment here in Colorado. And in that role, I work closely with my CDE colleagues as well as the Colorado Community College System Office in implementing the program because there's a lot of questions. And of course, one of those questions that come up a lot right now is what is concurrent enrollment and what is not concurrent enrollment in Colorado? And we have statute that helps direct us to answer those questions. And in statute, we have these definitions. And basically what you see in front of you is directly lifted from statute in terms of what the definition of concurrent enrollment is. I'm not going to read it to you, but essentially what concurrent enrollment does is provide an opportunity for students who are in high school to take college level courses, and they meet these conditions that are listed here, that they're enrolled in a Colorado local education provider. That's Colorado speak for school district or a charter school or BOCES. And that could also include college level career and technical courses, not just academic courses that will lead to a bachelor's degree or associate's degree. So definitely students who are in an approved certificate program could definitely take advantage of this and do. One of the other conditions in terms of a definition is that the course is guaranteed to transfer to another state institution in Colorado. And that's key because we want to make sure that when a student takes a course through concurrent enrollment, that it will apply to, or most likely apply to, a program of study after they graduate from high school. And cost is also very important. The way they have it listed out in terms of a definition in statute is that it's a little cost to the student, but further on, it does provide clarity that if a student is enrolled in a concurrent enrollment program course, that they pay no tuition. The parent and the family pays no tuition costs at all. They may have to pay fees or books and supplies, but they are to not pay tuition. And the local education provider pays up to the community college tuition rate in most situations. Now, everything else that exists is what we consider dual enrollment. A lot of four-year institutions, for example, offer programs which don't fall under the concurrent enrollment definition. And so they cannot call it concurrent enrollment. They have to call it either their branded, their specific kind of branded program that they might have, or dual enrollment or something else, but they just can't call it concurrent enrollment. And these college courses, we have an example here that CU Succeed is one. Now the credit that is taken through these courses may or may not be guaranteed to transfer. A lot of the courses through dual enrollment programs do transfer, but they're not required to, like they are in concurrent enrollment. And the costs also are not guaranteed to be covered by the LEP. So sometimes the student and the family might be required to pay some of the tuition costs through dual enrollment programs. And Michael, if you could advance the slide. And another aspect of statute is assent that I know a lot of you are aware of. And assent is essentially a fifth-year program in high school, which provides an opportunity for students who have met the graduation requirements as a senior to be able to stay and take college level courses their sixth or the fifth year in high school. So they won't receive their high school diploma until after their fifth year. And the local education provider will be paying for the tuition for those courses that the student is enrolled in for that year. So this is a great opportunity for students to further along in their college path. And this also provides an opportunity for a lot of times for students to earn their associate's degree before they graduate from high school. So this is a great program. And there's one other thing I want to make sure that you all are aware of. I talked about the definitions of concurrent enrollment in terms of what concurrent enrollment is and what it's not. But there's been a lot of specific questions in terms of concurrent enrollment, especially to recent statute. Some confusion as to, hey, is this concurrent enrollment or isn't it? So a couple of weeks ago, in partnership with the Colorado Department of Education and the Colorado Community College System, we had a webinar, kind of a town hall webinar to discuss this flow chart that we created, which is kind of like a checklist of items of things that are required to be considered concurrent enrollment. And the link that I just put in the chat box goes to that flow chart. So you can use this flow chart as a reference to see if the program that you're offering or that you're exploring is indeed concurrent enrollment. Answers a lot of questions. One of the most common questions is if the program is offered through an extended studies program, like through a four-year institution, cannot be considered concurrent enrollment. And the way that statute is worded is that no, if it's extended studies, it cannot be considered concurrent enrollment. It would have to be a dual enrollment program instead. So that definitely visit that flow chart. It's got a lot of helpful information on there. And also has information in terms of if you have follow-up questions that you can contact either CDE or myself, and we'll be very happy to help you. And of course, as Michael said, we'll definitely be happy to take questions throughout this presentation. But really, the best part of this presentation is about to come.
Great. Thanks so much, Carl. Really appreciate it. I do see one question in the chat related to that webinar that you just hosted. Some kudos there. And also, was that recorded, and is that something that can be provided to folks?
It was recorded, and I will find that link and put it in the chat box in a couple of minutes.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thanks so much. Let's do this. Great. So Carl, really appreciate you kind of helping us with those definitions, because I think it's really important to kind of keep all those buckets clear as we're talking about what we're going to talk about and who we're talking about when we're talking about all of these different types of outcomes. So to start, I just want to give you all a little bit of an overview of some of the current landscape of concurrent enrollment, the state's concurrent enrollment program in Colorado so far. So we recently just released our most recent concurrent enrollment report at CDHE, and this covers the data for the 18-19 academic year. So a couple highlights just to be able to provide to you all. In this most recent report, we had over 50,000 students statewide participating in some sort of dual enrollment program in 18-19. Again, that's one of the various buckets, over 50,000 students participating in that. When we look at that, we're looking at about 40% of Colorado high school graduates participating in some sort of dual enrollment program before they graduate. I know it's a little bit hard to see on the left-hand side there, but going from 2012, where we had about 20% of Colorado high school graduates doing some type of dual enrollment, now up to about 40% in 2018. Really exciting, very powerful to be able to see how how all of these programs in various ways, shapes, and forms have grown and evolved over time. So when we look specifically at the state's concurrent enrollment program, we had almost 35,000 students participating in the state's concurrent enrollment program, which was an 11% increase compared to last year. And looking specifically at the state's program, we had almost 300,000 college credit hours attempted. Really exciting, very powerful in terms of being able to equip students to have these experiences while they're still in high school. I'm gonna just I don't know if I'll go into too much more detail, because I think I have more slides on these in a minute. So I'm gonna just provide this to you again, just a snapshot of some of the highlights from last year's or this year's report, and being able to talk about all of these wonderful things. So this is a chart that's in the report as well, being able to show all the different buckets that we talked about in terms of concurrent or dual enrollment, and looking at the past 3 years worth of data. So as you can see, we've seen very good growth in terms of all of these buckets over time, and being able to really increase the usage of these various programs, and again, cracking that 50,000 number this past year. As I said, concurrent enrollment, the state's concurrent enrollment program continues to grow. We had 28 institutions of higher ed and an estimated 520 cooperative agreements in place with districts across the state using the concurrent enrollment model. So, an LEP, a school district, can have multiple agreements with multiple institutions of higher education. So that's how we get to that 500 number. And being able to really have all of those agreements work together as best we can, just really being able to provide that access to students of the state's concurrent enrollment program. In total, we had 2 BOCES and 172 school districts participating in concurrent enrollment in 18-19, which represents 97% of districts and 86% of high schools. So really being able to show that we have a pretty good uptake of concurrent enrollment statewide, and being able to lean into that work more and more to support districts, support schools in terms of offering the state's concurrent enrollment programs to students. Another measure that we've looked at the past couple years has been the number of districts that have less than 5% concurrent enrollment participation among their 9th through 12th grade populations. So this past year, we had 31 districts who had that less than 5% concurrent enrollment participation rate, which was a decrease from 34 in the previous year. So being able to help those districts in a lot of different ways. I know our colleagues at CDE and Carl as well have been doing a lot to support districts and being able to equip them to better serve the state's concurrent enrollment program to students. And so hopefully we continue to see more and more districts have more of their populations participate in this program as we go forward. As Carl mentioned, the Ascent program, essentially a fifth-year program for high school students. We had 42 districts participating in this program with a total of, sorry, I need to move my box here because I can't see the slide, 561 students participating in Ascent during the 18-19 academic year, which has been an increase. One of the exciting things about the Ascent program is a majority of the students are Hispanic. So being able to really serve that population through this program, I think, has been very powerful. And as we at CDHE look to our goals and master plan of erasing equity gaps, being able to rely on programs and work through programs like Ascent, I think, will be crucial to that success. A little bit about the demographics of concurrent enrollment in 1819. As you can see, we had growth in terms of many of our race ethnic groups in terms of participating in the state's concurrent enrollment program. I'll also say when we look at the mix of race ethnicity in terms of the concurrent enrollment program and compare that to the mix in terms of the 9th to 12th grade total high school population, we see a pretty good similarity. The concurrent enrollment program is a little bit more white, but in large part, we see a pretty good diversification of the concurrent enrollment program statewide. So I think that is of particular note, again, as we at CDHE and others think about erasing equity gaps, just being able to serve all of these populations as much as we can. And again, being able to see this growth year over year in terms of a lot of these populations, very powerful. When we think about the state's concurrent enrollment program, as Carl mentioned, low to no cost for students, and really being able to leverage the state's concurrent enrollment program as an avenue to address the affordability question when it comes to higher ed. Being able to provide more of these opportunities to students to get that credit while they're still in high school and not have to pay that those credit hours when they get to post-secondary, that could be at a higher rate. So as I said, high school students attempted almost 300,000 concurrent enrollment credit hours in 1819, and the large majority of those, 94%, were passed. So very good success rates in terms of students who are participating in the state's concurrent enrollment program and being able to have those credits and those credits transferring when they go on to post-secondary. The other element of this is just a little bit of an example of what a student could theoretically save when they are in higher education after high school if they've done concurrent enrollment. So if they've done one course, two courses, three courses, a semester's worth of courses, etc., being able to show how much savings that is in terms of dollars at the 2- and 4-year level. Again, this is somewhat theoretical because every student is different and every student's experience is different in terms of what they are pursuing, but in large part just being able to show that having those concurrent enrollment credit hours can really mean a lot of savings to students once they enter post-secondary. I always say one of my favorite metrics of the concurrent enrollment report is to be able to look at the number of high school students or the number of high school students who participating in concurrent enrollment or Ascent and got a post-secondary credential before they graduated high school because of those programs. And in 1819, we had over 3,000 students get some sort of post-secondary credential before they graduated high school because they participated in concurrent enrollment or Ascent. As you can see, many of those are those less than 1-year certificates, but every year we usually see one student who was able to get a bachelor's degree because of their participation in these programs. And we always go back to the data to make sure that's right and to make sure we're looking at the right thing. And this year again, we saw a student be able to get a bachelor's degree before they graduated high school. I will note that I think that one student was an Ascent student. So really being able to highlight this as we think about ways to increase credential completion among students and be able to work towards our goal at CDHE of reaching a 66% educational attainment rate by 2025 statewide. Things like this, extremely powerful and helpful in that attempt. So that's kind of an overview of what concurrent enrollment looked like in the 1819 school year. I want to move on to some of the research that we've done in this space. And I wanted to start with our colleague, Dr. Pam Buckley, who has helped us in terms of some of the quantitative research into all of this. So Pam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Hello, nice to see you all virtually. And I'm excited to talk about this study. And then Robert will talk a little bit later about the second part of the grant funding we had to study concurrent enrollment here in Colorado. This next piece is going to focus on what we call the quantitative study, looking at impacts on post-secondary outcomes. And all that I really want to note is that, first of all, this was funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, was our primary funder. We then got another grant from the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab. This is a project that it's 7 years in the making. So the work that you all doing on the ground, implementing this important work, those of us behind the scenes playing with data, a lot of time and effort went into this study. So it's very exciting, not just to share the results, but to share it with those of you doing the work, because I think hopefully it's going to have the most meaning, because we're talking about the students that you all serve. And the other thing I want to note is how rare these studies are. And part of why it was 7 years in the making is the amount of complexity and careful thinking around data governance and linking data sets and looking at outcomes and protecting confidentiality, et cetera. We have an academic paper under review, so I was able to look at the literature. And the last time that I could find a published study in the academic literature that touched on data points like we're about to today was published in 2010. So the cohorts were from studies even earlier. So this really, what we're about to go through with you, are updated results that are interesting and complicated. And the whole goal of doing this work was to support Colorado, the Colorado Department of Higher Ed, and your partners in thinking through what research questions are important to you and to Colorado. Robert and I then secured the funding. And the purpose of the funding was to develop a partnership between the researchers and the stakeholders to identify what's important that you want to know. And then Robert and I came in and provided the rigor in terms of thinking about how to use the appropriate design and statistics to look at the results. But now we're at the important phase of dissemination. So we've got the rigor, we've got the results, and now we're sharing it with you to think about what does this mean for Colorado and the students you serve. And the other part of this is to provide the technical assistance to our partners at CDHE and others, so that Michael, being involved with this project from the start, is going to lead you through the presentation and talk about implications. And that's part of the other goal of this project, so that CDHE came to us with questions, helped us with the MOUs and the linking. We provided the rigor and the analysis. Now CDHE is going to be instrumental in the dissemination and working with CDE and other partners around the table here to get the word out on what we're learning here. So I'm going to now kick it back to Michael, but before I do, just talking specifically about this, what I'm going to call the quantitative study, I want to identify those that you see on the slide, as many people went into providing input and giving ideas. The people on the slide were the ones that spent a lot of hours talking this through and giving feedback. And so I do want to, I want to thank my colleagues, Philip Pendergast from CDHE as a consultant, and Kristen Kloppenstein from the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab. They were the co-PIs on this particular study. And then we've got our friends at CDHE. Many of you here know them: Lauren Ramsey, Kim Post, Michael here, and Maggie Yang, who represented the CDH team, the liaison, in helping us think through this study. Michael, back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Pam. And I will echo, as much as, we want to do great things at CDHE and our other agencies in the state, this would not have happened without the help of Pam and Robert to be able to really think about these questions, help us through this work. And so I have so much thanks and appreciation to them for helping shepherd these conversations for so long. So getting to specifically some of the quantitative things that we did in this study. So one of the purposes that we had going in was to inform Colorado broadly and understanding the concurrent enrollment program, so again, the state's concurrent enrollment program, as a driver for efficiency in getting to on-time post-secondary credential completion and improved wages. So being able to have this be our North Star when thinking about the questions, thinking about this work very, very broadly. That then led us into some more specific research questions. So being able to say, all right, so for looking at the state's concurrent enrollment program, what are the things that we want to specifically look at? So what was the impact, or what is the impact of concurrent enrollment on college matriculation 1 year after expected high school graduation for a high school student? And then for those students who matriculated to college within 1 year of expected high school graduation, what's the impact of concurrent enrollment on earning a 2-year degree in 2 years, a four-year degree in 4 years, a 4-year degree in 3 years, and then what are the wage outcomes for individuals broadly on that work? So these were kind of the research questions that we had going in terms of looking at the state's concurrent enrollment program and being able to hone in on these specific questions. I'll do a call out to some of the data sources that we used in this work. Of course, the data that we have at CDHE from all of the public post-secondary institutions in Colorado. Also some data that we have from the National Student Clearinghouse in terms of matriculation and completion for those Colorado high school students who went out of state for post-secondary. I'll also call out the Department of Education being able to use demographic and 9th grade achievement data to be able to help with the control of these cohorts and being able to do some of that work. And Pam might go into that in just a minute. But also being able, looking at the wage data through the data sharing agreement that we of course have with CDE, but also the data sharing agreement that we have with CDLE, Department of Labor and Employment, being able to look at those wage outcomes for individuals, for those of whom who stay in Colorado. So really being able to leverage these data relationships that we have with so many, and being able to do all of this in a well-governed, responsible way, I think is really a testament to what can be achieved when we're all working together in this space. So Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about how comparisons were made and what some of the cohorts looked like.
I'm happy to do that. One other thing I want to note, I mentioned earlier about the literature, and there aren't a lot of studies that connect students starting in high school to post-secondary outcomes. There are some that are getting more and more outdated, but to my knowledge, to our knowledge, this is the first study that is linking high school students through post-secondary and into the workforce and earnings. So that's another important consideration, that this is looking at new outcomes. It hasn't been studied to date in terms of looking at the literature. So one more note on the importance of this study and the collaboration between all the agencies that came together to make this happen. I'm just going to talk quickly about the design, and then I'm going to give it back to Michael to talk about the results and implications, and then giving Robert some time to talk about the cost of all this, another important thing to consider. And I mentioned earlier that part of the role that my colleagues and I played from the research lens is to provide rigor to the design. So what our goal was in determining who we identified as treatment versus comparing them to a group of students that we would call the control, how could we make those groups look as similar as possible, with the exception that some students had the treatment and others did not? We identified treatment as those who had access or taken, attempted a credit in terms of the concurrent enrollment program defined by the state. We did parcel out students who had only been involved in the Ascent program. We parceled out students who were involved in early college high school model. And we parceled out students that only took dual enrollment that was not funded by the state. So really, the research question that we're focusing on here is looking at those who had attempted at least one credit in the state's concurrent enrollment program compared to students from the same schools during the same period of time who did not attempt a credit. And a goal in the design I'm going to briefly go through to here is we wanted to parse out students who would have self-selected out of concurrent enrollment. because those students could be systematically different from those who self-selected into concurrent enrollment. And the way we did that is we identified our matched comparison group on 2 levels. The first step was to look at school level information. And we wanted to match schools as similar as possible, with one exception. Some offered concurrent enrollment and some did not. So we matched students on 4 important characteristics that we've seen from the literature are predictive of post-secondary outcomes, and that's looking at college rates, college going rates, average 9th grade reading scores. So this is where the CDE data came into account. Percent free and reduced lunch eligibility, so income as a proxy at the school level. And the 4th one being urban versus rural. For 1 through 3, those first 3 variables we matched as close as possible. For the 4th variable, we matched urban schools to urban schools and rural schools to rural schools. So that was the first step in our design. The second step then was to look within those schools. And we identified schools that had above the state average in terms of offering concurrent enrollment. And they were identified as concurrent enrollment rich schools, and they were identified for the treatment, meaning they were offering concurrent enrollment. And we compared them to schools that we called concurrent enrollment poor, that I can't remember the exact, we have a better word for that, but schools that weren't offering concurrent enrollment. So we matched them based on opportunity, and then these other 4 variables I discussed earlier: college going rate, 9th grade reading scores, FRL, and urbanicity versus rural. That was the first step. The second step then is within schools identified for the treatment program, those that were offering concurrent enrollment, we found students matched to other students within schools that weren't offering concurrent enrollment. And we matched them on 9th grade reading scores at the student level, free and reduced price lunch eligibility, underrepresented minority or race ethnicity status, and English language learner status. So those were the 4 variables on the student level. And we used a statistical technique called propensity score matching that I won't get into to give us students that were alike on all 4 of those characteristics. That's the design. It's called a quasi-experimental design. The next slide we're going to get into is, okay, once we identified the method for matching treatment schools to control schools and treatment students to control students, what cohorts were we looking at? And then what outcomes could we evaluate based on our data set? Keep in mind that we had data pulled from a point in time. And since students are all entering high school at different ages and entering college at different ages, depending on the outcome, we're going to have a different sample size because this is a cohort point in time study. Michael went through the 5 research questions, and what this slide shows you are the 5 cohorts that we included in this study. The concurrent enrollment policy, the legislation was enacted in May of 2009. So the first cohort we pulled for the study was 2009-10. And given that we pulled data at a point in time, the most current cohort that we looked at was 2015-16. Those were students in 11th grade is when we started following them within those 5 cohorts. Then we followed them through 11th and 12th grade and into post-secondary and workforce. Depending on the 5 research questions, you can see the sample size differs depending on the amount of data available. And that's really the crux of what this slide gets at. But keep in mind what we did then is, as we did the analyses, for example, that first research question, we were able to collapse cohorts across all 5 years into that research question, which is looking at matriculation into college, versus the second research question is looking at not just did you matriculate, but did you persist for a year? We were only able to add in 4 of the 5 cohorts, etc. That's how this slide reads. But again, if you're really interested in these technical pieces, in the chat, Michael shared where to find the technical report online. We get into lots of detail around this. What's, I think, of great interest and excitement is looking at what those results came out of this table here. So Michael's going to get into that, and then we'll talk about implications for policy and practice. Michael,
Great.
back to
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Pam. I just really exciting to be able to do all of those things. As Pam said, to our knowledge, no one else has done exactly what we have done in this work. And so really being able to lean into that and to share it with you all, and to all of that, all of this buildup onto the results, being able to look at all of these different questions that I outlined earlier. So looking, and I will say with the percentages here, it's important to note the difference between the two based on the models that Pam just outlined and how we did this analysis. What's most important is the difference between control and treatment. So pay attention to those differences. I think that's key. So when we're looking at the first question, the impact of concurrent enrollment, the state's concurrent enrollment program, on matriculation to post-secondary. As you can see, 77% college going rate for those who were in concurrent enrollment compared to 52% for those who were in the control group. That's huge. Really being able to see the impact that concurrent enrollment is having in terms of enhanced college matriculation. We in Colorado have, for a long time, had some stagnant college going rates now, statewide. And so if we see that concurrent enrollment is really playing a role in actually getting more students to college, very exciting, very much wanting to lean into that work. Then we look at the 2-year degree in 2 years, 4-year degree in 4 years, and 4-year degree in 3 years. As you can see with these, for each one of those questions, those students who were in the state's concurrent enrollment program do better than those who were in the control group. So really being able to show the value of more students getting an on-time degree or finishing a degree early by being able to participate in the state's concurrent enrollment program. And then, as I said, being able to use the data via the data sharing agreement that we have with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, being able to look at those wage outcomes for students. So as you can see, higher wage outcomes for students who were in concurrent enrollment while they were in high school compared to those who weren't. And then with all of this, we saw these improved outcomes by similar amounts regardless of income, minority status, gender, or academic ability. So again, as we at CDHE and all of us are leaning into the work of trying to erase equity gaps however we can, being able to see that we see these types of results or these types of yields, if you will, in terms of people who are participating in concurrent enrollment and really being able to help in terms of erasing those equity gaps, I think more and more of a case to lean into concurrent enrollment as a strategy for the state to be able to lift all of these boats.
Michael, before you go
Yes.
on, I would like us to field a question that came
Sure.
in. I'm going to read the question from the chat box. For your research, did you use the definition of students participating in concurrent enrollment as only those taking the courses that would be guaranteed to transfer to other Colorado public institutions? My response to that, and then Carl and Michael, feel free to chime in. We identified the treatment group as students who attempted at least one concurrent enrollment class that had been funded through the state policy, or credit, I should say. And if it's funded through the state policy, my understanding is yes, then that means that would be part of what would guarantee the transfer. Is that correct? Am I answering that right, Michael?
Yeah, I think largely yes. I would say transferability itself was not something that we used in terms of identifying the course. It was just whether or not this was deemed as a concurrent enrollment course. Now, as Carl can maybe illuminate, the transfer question has evolved over the years as we've gone forward, but just being able to be in a concurrent enrollment course was what we used as kind of the flag. Carl, any comments for you?
That's right on. That transferability component came into legislation 2 sessions ago. So if the student was coded as being in concurrent enrollment, then they were folded into it. So that could include courses that the student took in academic programs, but also could include certificate courses as well, which may or may not be transferable.
Yeah, and just to touch on Colleen's question, so it could be a welding course or a college algebra. Yes, it could be if the student is doing a concurrent enrollment college algebra or a concurrent enrollment CTE program. Those are included in this work, kind of the bucket of concurrent enrollment.
And a seed we could plant, and you might all be thinking this, is we started with a broad definition of what the treatment is. There we have in several of the reports we're writing what would be some interesting follow-up research questions. And again, it's based on sample size to be able to tease out how to better define concurrent enrollment. Do we define it by type of course credit, et cetera? Because we just didn't have access to that level of detail in the data set I was given. And we also have to consider sample size. So the more cohorts of studies we can add on to our database, the larger the sample size and the better we might be able to get at some of these more nuanced research questions.
Great. Thanks so much for the questions and to Pam. And then next, we're going to go on to Robert to talk a little bit about another element of this work, which was the cost and returns model. So being able to see these results from the quantitative work. Also, some work that Robert did specifically with a lot of school districts and institutions of higher ed to be able to better understand how the concurrent enrollment program actually operates. So Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh my goodness. So thank you very much. It's wonderful to be on this call. This is the largest group of people I've been in since March. Looks like there's like 75 of you here, and I would love to see your faces if you are willing. My daughter is at home taking a concurrent enrollment class at ACC, and I noticed that they do turn their cameras on, but they also, being high schoolers, all literally rolled out of bed and turned their cameras on. And so I'm pretty confident you're going to look better than my daughter and her participants in the teacher cadet class she's taken at ACC. So wonderful to see you, and I appreciate everyone's interest and participation. Hey, look at all these people. Oh, I feel much better now. Thank you. I appreciate it. So it's nice to see your mouths, if that doesn't sound weird. But one of the goals of this partnership that Michael and Pam discussed is that we wanted to see if we could calculate the return on the state's investment in concurrent enrollment. And to do returns on investment, you really need to measure two things. You need to measure first how much was invested, and then you need to measure if there was a change in student outcomes, which Pam showed, there's a change in student outcomes, then did that create a return, a monetary result? And so I did the cost model, and then our colleague Rachel Christensen, who was at NCHEMS when we started this project and has moved on since then, created the returns model. So the cost model was essentially, I used case studies to identify what are the costs. And when I say costs, I mean economic costs. How many resources are put into providing concurrent enrollment? That's not the same thing as the budgetary costs, but the economic costs of doing concurrent enrollment. And I created a cost model calculating all of the resources, or trying to calculate all of the resources that go into concurrent enrollment for 1 year of concurrent enrollment. And then I used that to identify the cost per student. So the ingredients model is just the methodology that is accepted by IES for calculating the economic costs of running any program. I'm doing similar analysis now, actually, or preparing to do similar analysis around the economic costs of doing special education in the country using the same ingredients model here. So let's go to the next slide. And so the cost model, ingredients model is pretty straightforward. You essentially identify the amounts of different ingredients that go into running the program. And the ingredients that I identified focused on the salaries of the teachers providing the courses, the salaries and time associated with administering the program, both at the IHEs and at the school districts, the space for running the programs, the economic cost of the space, and then the books and materials for each course, and just multiply the number of students and courses times those costs, and you end up with the total cost for the program. And that was my cost model. So you want to keep going? So what I estimated is that there are costs both at the district level and the IHE level, and I ran my cost model for 16-17, trying to align the cost estimate, not perfectly, but as close as possible with the students that Pam was describing in her outcomes model. So we try to align the cost model with the outcomes model. Now, the key thing that Pam talks about is how she wasn't describing all of the students that participated in concurrent enrollment. She was describing a particular sample of students that participated in concurrent enrollment. And that sample was created essentially because it allowed her to do a treatment and comparison group in her design. And so she is not saying in her results that all students that participate in concurrent enrollment have this change in outcome. She is saying students that fit within her sample have this change in outcome. And so Rachel, my colleague at NCHEMS at the time, estimated how many children participating in concurrent enrollment did this describe. And her estimate was it is described about 17,000 students within the 16-17 year who would have participated in concurrent enrollment. That is students that are similar to what was in Pam's sample. And out of that, there would have been 4,000 additional completers, and completers meaning completing any post-secondary credential from the certificates that Michael was describing through the 4-year degree. And I estimated that those students were, for their cost to do their concurrent enrollment totally per student was about $2,000 and was about a $36,000 or $36 million investment by the state, calculating both the investments by IHEs and districts. Okay, so hold on to that. This sample is our through thread through all the different pieces of research. So the next component is the returns analysis that Dr. Christensen did. And what she did is essentially compared what are the increases in income and tax revenues and decreases in Medicaid costs and decreases in corrections that come from people having higher levels of education. So those are the returns from increasing the educational attainment of children by participation in concurrent enrollment. And she estimated that there were a bunch of different returns at all these different levels. And she also estimated the increased income that the participants would get from within this sample. So let's keep going. And so what she said was that there would be an increase of income for 1 year and then an increase over the lifetime of people who participated in concurrent enrollment and had these improved outcomes. So, so over the lifetime of this sample of 20,000 children, if they participated in concurrent enrollment and had the change in outcomes that Pam identified, there would be additional revenue and savings for our government at the state and local level of almost $750 million. Sorry, let me get that. Got to get those zeros correct. Okay. And then using the returns that Rachel calculated and the cost that I calculated, we estimated that the ROI for any given year is negative. That is, we put the big investment in these children in participating in concurrent enrollment through both our districts and our schools. But over the lifetime of the children who participated in concurrent enrollment and had this change in outcomes that Pam identified, there was a positive ROI for both the state that made the investment, the federal government that didn't make any investment, and a total return in investment for both levels of government based on participation in concurrent enrollment. So all of these are estimates and they're extrapolations and they have a lot of assumptions underneath them. But I feel confident in the basic finding that concurrent enrollment has a positive return on investment for the state, for this sample of children. Maybe not all children, right? But for this sample of children who increased their likelihood of completing a post-secondary certificate, leading to an increased tax revenue for the state and decreased expenses for the state.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's fantastic, Robert. And you know, taking those two things together, the quantitative findings and also the cost and return findings, being able to show the ripple effects that the treatment of this program and students participating in this program can have within our state, within the trajectories of their lives, you know, just so exciting. I know I've used the word exciting a lot, but it really is exciting and powerful, and something that we want to lean even more into. So when we talk about kind of the implications from this work, both Robert's work, Pam's work, and all of our work, you know, some of the things that we want to make sure that we do more of is, of course, increase awareness among families of concurrent enrollment, being able to show how it's a proven pathway to equitably and effectively support high school students, and then helping them enroll in those career-connected post-secondary education opportunities. So being able to lean into that work, and then also being able to provide high school counselors and also college counselors with the information they need to help advise students on the benefits of concurrent enrollment, and connecting more and more individuals in the high school setting to the college setting when it comes to course selection, transferability, applicability of credits, all the rest. So being able to really lean into that work at CDHE with our other colleagues as well, I think will be one of our main focuses. I put this in the chat a couple times, but these are just some of the links that we have to not only the concurrent enrollment report, but some of the more detailed information of the quantitative study, and also some of Robert's work as well for those who maybe have a few more questions. So that's that.
And Michael, I just wanted to say, oh,
yeah.
sorry, before you get into acknowledgements, I just put in the chat and I hit send a little too quickly. I was trying to clean it up a little, but to Robert's point about the sample in the study and what that represents when we think about cost and long-term or lifetime returns to the state, we have a policy brief that is up on the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab website, and it's on this slide. And it gets into, we did a comparison of what our match sample looked like for the treatment group to the rest of Colorado. And I just gave a summary here in the chat. I would encourage you to look at that policy brief to get a little bit more of an understanding of who those students are that were in our study.
Wonderful. No, thanks for that, Pam. So then with all of those additional resources, again, just wanted to, again, acknowledge Pam and Robert for their wonderful help over the years with all of this work. And also, none of this would have been possible without the support from the U.S. Department of Education's Institute for Education Sciences, and also the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab. Really being able to have that support from them to fund this work, and to help us really carve out the time and the resources necessary to do these complex analyses and complicated conversations and all the rest. So again, so thankful to them for their support on all of these fronts. So happy to take some questions. And I'll also say, Pam teed this up a little bit, happy to continue this work. You know, whether it's working within the partners that have been part of this work previously, or other partners who want to partner with us, different opportunities that come up, you know that we are open to a whole host of conversations, and really wanting to be able to again, lean into this work more and more. So many more questions came up as we were doing this work, and that we would love to be able to dive into. So identifying those ways that we can continue that work, really wanting to do all that we can on that front. So I'm going to stop talking and really just open this up for some Q&A, being able to take any kind of back and forth conversations that you all might like to have, or questions that maybe came up that we either didn't get to in the chat, although I think we did a pretty good job there, or other questions that you do have for us.
In case anybody's wondering, even though we're over our time allotment, we're going to keep this on until all the questions have been asked and answered.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. Any other questions?
Looks like we covered it. Please read the reports, and you have our emails if you want to follow up with questions.
By all means, please do. Yeah, my email, Carl's email, Pam's email, Robert's email, all of us are very willing to dive more into any of this if any more questions arise.
And we did have a question, was this shared with NACEP? Yes, we did the same presentation for them. We have shared these links. We have shared these reports with them as well.
Yeah. And again, I know that Robert and Pam are working on more academic publications on some of these things. And so as those wheels continue to turn, just being able to put that out into the world as well.
Right.
Great, wonderful. Well, again, thank you all so much. I'll use the word one more time. We're really excited about all this, to be able to have this information, to equip us to have lots of conversations and make the case for the state's concurrent enrollment program. We continually talk in the legislature and in other places about how best to facilitate this experience to students, one of many pathways to students. But again, being able to show the impacts that we see from this program just really help us in that effort. So again, thank you all so much and hope to talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. And don't forget to follow the feedback link that's in the program. We need your feedback for next year.
Please, absolutely.
Wonderful to see you all.